All right, hello everyone. Uh, Today we're just gonna get back into the stuff we were talking about yesterday with the reciprocal system and my personal experiences with it. Um, and it just kind of gives you a little bit of background about my motivation, why I want to be teaching this, and why this is a core part of the curriculum that I'm presenting on this channel. Um, Now, I think we were leaving off. Uh, I had just finished grad school, and I was um, lecturing in U.S. history at this university, same one that I went to grad school. Uh, just finished my PhD, and was getting ready to go out into the job market. But I was doing some research in order to uh, turned my dissertation into a book. Just so I was working on that, and I came across Anthony Braxton, one of my saxophone players, who uh, my dissertation is about, and he said that uh, time has more than one dimension because one-dimensional time is just tempo, and we're playing polyrhythms, we're playing syncopation. Those are in other dimensions of time. So I took that lead and I looked up, you know, multidimensional time. I wanted to see if there were any physicists that would back him up on any of that. And that's how I got to Dewey Larson. Now, what Dewey Larson really says is that time is three-dimensional, or at least multidimensional. It's the same amount of dimensions of time as there are of space, because time and space are identical, except that they are reciprocals of each other. So whatever qualities that space has, time also has, and vice versa. So time, we normally perceive space as being three-dimensional, and we normally perceive time as progressing. It's always getting later and later and later and later in time. And so those two qualities are transferred into their counterpart. So we see. So he's really saying that time is three-dimensional, just like space, even though those dimensions are not, directly perceivable. But time is three-dimensional and space progresses. So there's a progression of space in the same way that there's a progression of time, and there is a three-dimensional time that comes into play as well. Now, that is not exactly the key of his theory. Larson's one of his books, his book on astronomy is called Universe of Motion. And that's really what Larson, the crux of what Larson is talking about. Okay, like, so if you go back to the ancient Greeks or something where they have the atom, and they say that the atom is the basis of matter, and the universe is made out of matter. And then, early 20th century Einstein comes along and says, well, everything looks like it's made out of matter, but ultimately everything is made out of energy. And E equals mc squared. So the key thing, the fundamental component of the universe is energy. And Larson, not too many years later, a couple generations later, comes along and says, well, the universe is not made out of matter, and it's not made out of energy either. In fact, um, there's something that underlies both energy and matter, that the universe is made out of. And he says that um, the fact of E equals mc squared, showing that energy can be converted into matter and vice versa, demonstrates conclusively that the universe is made out of neither of those things. There's something that underlies both of them, and that is the c squared part. And the c is the speed of light. Okay, so E equals mc squared, energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. The c squared is the translation between the energy and the matter. And the fact that matter can be converted into energy and vice versa means that there is something else that is composing a universe. Larson really says that that is motion, or the c squared part. The universe is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between time and space. Time and space are identical to each other, and they are related in motion. And, motion is basically a fraction between time and space. So that's a reciprocal relationship. So time over space or space over time are both motion. In Larson's system, time over space is speed. Space over time is speed. 20 miles per hour, 20 miles of space per 1 hour of time. That's speed. Now, the opposite is time over space. It took me 20 minutes to move that thing 5 feet. That is energy, time divided by space. Now, space and time, though, both have 3 dimensions. So you can have time over space, space over time to the second power. That's acceleration. So-called gravity is 9.8 at sea level, is 9.8 meters per second, meaning that, it's going 9.8 meters per second, but it's speeding up by 9.8 meters per second. So every second it speeds up by that amount. And that's acceleration. So that's the speed. You would have to use that equation to figure out how fast something was moving if you dropped it from a 50-story building. And at the start, it's not moving, at all. And then by the time it hits the ground, it's accelerated according to how many ever seconds that it's taken. And there's a formula that you can use to figure out how long it takes something to fall from a certain height. Now there are all those permutations of space and time depending on your dimensions. So you can have time over space to the second power. Usually that's time to the second power over space to the second power is like a magnetic flux, among other things. Time over space to the second power would be force. Time to the second power over space is impulse. Time to the third power over space to the third power is matter. And you can plug that into the equation. E equals mc squared. So you have energy, which is time over space, equals matter, which is time to the third power over space to the third power, times the speed of light squared. Speed is space over time, so you have space to the second power over time to the second power. And so the equation works out. So that's a beautiful part of Larson's theory, is that you can check. You can check by the units of space to time in your equations. You can go back and look at a lot of the old equations from history and see if they check out according to time over space. Now, in the legacy science, they use whatever the MKS system or whatever, mass, time, and I don't even remember what it is. MKS system. It's space and matter is one of the fundamental components. Larson is just basically saying that there's only two fundamental components there, space and time. Ultimately, like say if you're looking at the tree of life, space and time are ultimately illusions. They don't exist. If you're going all the way up to the top of the tree, and you're talking in terms of ultimate reality, space and time don't exist. But if you are going to, drop down into the real world, you can use these time over space and time and space, components to map out your universe. Now, that's just a tiny introduction for the reciprocal system of theory. Now, he spells that out in the book, New Light on Space and Time, which is the first book that I got. Like I said, when I was working on turning my dissertation into a book, and I heard that Anthony Braxton talked about multidimensional time. I looked it up, found Larson's book, New Light on Space and Time, brought it home, or found it on the internet. You can find all Larson's books on the internet for free. Or at least almost all of them. And New Light in Space and Time is from 1965 or so. And, I got to reading it, and it's super tough going. Reading Larson is very hard. He assumes that you have the basic knowledge of, kind of like maybe a graduate student in science or something like that. He assumes that you know all this scientific background information. And so me being like a liberal arts person, it makes it difficult. But it also is difficult because it doesn't really appeal. Larson's theory doesn't appeal to scientists, because if you've ever read Thomas Kuhn's 1962 book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he goes through, in particular, the scientific revolution of the heliocentric theory, all the way from Copernicus to Newton, and shows how, people who are in the scientific field are not interested in changing their paradigms. They invested a great deal of time and energy into establishing that paradigm and learning that paradigm. And so when you come up with a whole new theory like Copernicus did with his heliocentric universe, those are fighting words. People are going to resist him at every turn. And in fact, Copernicus, I believe, originally came up with his theory in like 1508 or something like that. But he only shared it with like a few close friends and stuff, because he knew he was going to be executed or something, maybe even worse, if he actually tried to publish that and put it out there. As a result, his book didn't come out until 1543, which is the year that he died. So he published it on his deathbed when he didn't really have anything to lose, because he knew that he was putting himself in jeopardy, publishing the heliocentric theory. Now, this is not related to the flat earth stuff or anything. I'm not saying that I believe the heliocentric theory or otherwise. I'm pretty much an agnostic about all of that. But I'm just pointing out Thomas Kuhn's argument that, scientists are not objective. They have loyalties that they are firmly, wedded to, and that they're not going to change their mind about things. I told you the story about me going to see the physics teacher, and she basically kicked me out of her office before she, after, or just before she had said, of course, time only has one dimension. I've never heard of him before. That's her argument, is I've never heard of him. That's not an argument. That's not an argument that any mature adult would ever use to dismiss a theory. But that's exactly what she did openly. And then, of course, time only has one dimension. No evidence, no proof, no nothing. But that was enough for her, because that's the milieu that she's in. So anyway, I'm just saying that Larson didn't really set himself up for success, because he basically addressed his writings to a scientific audience, where in reality the scientific audience is the last group of people that he was going to convert. If he would have taken the time and kind of so-called dumbed down his approach and written his books for lay audiences, like scientific, intelligent people, but people that don't have a background, heavy background in science, he would have been much more successful. Now, Larson was familiar with Thomas Kuhn's theory, so I'm not sure why he was so kind of bullheaded in writing in the way that he did, inaccessible to your non-scientific audiences, and appealing to the scientific crowd. I mean, this was 50 years ago, over 50 years ago, so you can't really blame him for that, but that is really one of the main reasons why I think Larson's theory has been dead in the water. There are other reasons too. He made a few mistakes that we'll talk about later, but the mistakes are not with the theory. And Larson admitted that. He said, the mistakes that I have made are my own. The theory itself is correct. Now, there's a difference between the theory and applying the theory. And I might not have applied the theory correctly in all cases. And in those cases, my mistakes will reveal themselves under scrutiny. And he was right. So other people have kind of come along and tried to make corrections to the theory. And so now, as a result, nowadays, you have, the orthodox Larsonians, and then you have the revisionists. And, this is a pattern, that goes all the way back through not only the history of science, but the history of philosophy. Where you have the original person, and then you have people that are, not willing to look at other options, and so they're orthodox. They think that the original had it all right. And then you have the revisionists who are trying to, say, well, he got this wrong, this part I can't accept. And then, as far as Larson goes, I'm definitely a revisionist, but I'm not a speculator. There have been some revisionists to Larson's theory that have been speculators, where they're just so willing to jettison Larson's theory, even though they don't really even have a full grasp of Larson's theory. I feel like you have to have a full grasp of Larson's theory before you can even think about trying to, to change it up or anything. Anyway, once I got into Larson's work, it took me forever, but even after the first day of studying it, I was convinced that he was onto something very big. And so I just pretty much threw aside my, my academic career, whatever that meant, and just said, I'm going to just figure this out. And it's going to pay dividends, whether it pays money or whether it just, whatever it's going to lead to, a path of truth, and it's going to lead to a path of, this is stuff that I wanted to figure out in the first place. It's been a much more difficult road than I thought, because Larson did make some mistakes, in my opinion, and that's slowed me down. Then again, Dr. Bruce Perrett came along, and with Dr. KVK Nehru, especially those two, but others as well, and have made some revisions that have made a lot of sense. But the whole thing is kind of a jumble at this point, and I'm trying to work my way through it. And I feel like the more people that know about it, the better that we can correct it. So I don't know that I really got too far with anything with this video, but we'll come back very soon and talk more about this, either today or tomorrow, and get into this a little bit more, I guess more of the autobiographical stuff. Eventually we will get to Larson's biography, and then we will get into the nuts and bolts of it. We're going to start with his final book, which is published posthumously, called Beyond Space and Time, which is on metaphysics. Okay, we'll see you guys later. You can donate to me, buy my books. Those are all, the links are there. Okay, have a great day.